We're never going to be able to satisfy a God-given desire with something from the world. I'll tell you what I mean by that. God created us with a desire to be loved. But if we're going to turn to the world and look for the feeling of being loved by different people around us and not from God, we're never going to be satisfied in that. Or he created us with a desire to have a purpose and a meaning in life. But if we look for that in the world, we're never going to be satisfied or find that. Or the desire to have worth and feel like we have value. But if we look for that in the world, it's never going to be satisfied. God gave us a desire to feel known, right? Isn't that so simple? Like we just want to feel known and understood. But unless we're turning to God, the one who created us, the one who knows the number of hairs on our heads, the one who created the universe and yet knows your name, unless we turn to him to feel known, we will never truly feel known. Now is it going? It's going. How are we doing tonight? We having a good time? Can I share with you guys something that's pretty cool that I feel like it's fun for us to celebrate together? We don't normally share this, but last week we had 20 students come on a middle school Wednesday for the very first time. 20 students last week. Can I tell you? Yes. Isn't that exciting? And can I tell you that tonight there are 11 people in the room that have never come on a middle school Wednesday? Can we encourage that? That is so exciting. So if it is your first time here, whether it's tonight or just in the past couple of weeks, I know sixth graders, you are just joining us in the past month or so. It's just really exciting to have new faces and faces who have been around. So just excited you all are here. If we haven't met, like Joel said, my name is Nicole. I'm one of the members of the student team. And so it's just awesome to be in this space together. So I'm gonna throw out something to get started tonight. I'm gonna say a phrase, and then if you think you know how to explain that phrase or define it, you can raise your hand and I'll call on one of you and we'll see what the phrase means. Are you ready for what I'm gonna say? No, okay, that's good. Thank you for your honesty. Okay, so the phrase is, hindsight is 2020. Anyone feel like they can explain that? Hindsight is 2020. Yes. Is your name Lily? What does it mean, Lily? Yeah, like when it's coming in the future, you don't see what's coming. What's another way that we can describe hindsight is 2020? Or maybe, raise your hand if you've never heard that phrase before. Okay, that's actually the majority of the room. That makes sense. All right, here's what it means. It means like, yes, when you're behind it and it's coming forward, you don't know what's gonna happen. But if you've passed it, like let's say maybe you're in kind of a hard or confusing situation, and then now it's in the past and you're looking back, you're able to look at it and kind of see the whole situation. You can see it really clearly. You understand more. You have a different perspective. Sometimes you might look back at it and be like, wow, I wish I had the perspective I had now versus when I was in that situation. Have you guys felt that before? Have you ever looked back at something in your life and been like, I kind of wish I had this perspective when I was actually in it? Is that a relatable feeling? I was thinking back, I honestly think it happens all the time. Like I think it's as simple as like when I look back at my childhood and I think about the things I used to complain about that my parents would ask me to do or tell me not to do. Like I remember when I was old enough to like sit in the front seat and I had the seatbelt on and I didn't like the way it felt on my neck. Can anyone else relate to that? Because I wasn't super tall. So I didn't like the way it felt on my neck. So I'd always take it around my head and I'd put it behind me. And then my parents would say, no, like you need to wear it in front of you how it's supposed to be worn. And I was so annoyed and I would complain about it and I'd be like, but mom, it hurts my neck. Now I look back and I'm like, yeah, that makes total sense. Like she was like, I don't really care about your neck hurting because I want you to be safe if something happens in the car. Like hindsight is 2020. I look back and I'm like, it's so much more clear. It's silly I complained in that situation. And I think that kind of perspective is how you and I today have the opportunity to read about different stories in the Bible. Like we've been going through the Old Testament together. We started in Genesis, and for a while now, we have been following a group of people called the Israelites. And we have a really interesting perspective because we can kind of look over and see the whole story at one time. And we see the Israelites fall into these patterns of like complaining or not trusting God. But from our perspective, we can look at it and we can be like, what? Like we're seeing time and time again that God's providing for you, or you really have nothing to complain about. Like God's doing amazing things in your life. But we're going to kind of zoom in today, and we're going to look at one example of the Israelites, and they kind of fall into this place of complaining. And then we're going to see how we can learn from that and apply it to our lives today. So we've seen God do big things for the Israelites, right? Like he sent the plagues in Egypt. He freed them from slavery. He parted the Red Sea. He gave them the 10 Commandments. He's done all these amazing things. And yet, in the chapter we're going to read, at the beginning of the chapter, we see the Israelites started complaining. And then God was like really frustrated and had this like righteous anger because he's like, what are you complaining about? And he actually like responds with this fire, and it's like this really big moment. And then literally the next verse, so God just responded to their complaining with fire in this big way. And the next verse is where we're going to pick up. So it says, it's in chapter 11, verse 4. It says, then the foreign rabble who were traveling with the Israelites. So these are people who are traveling with the Israelites, but they weren't Israelites. So it says the foreign rabble who were traveling with the Israelites began to crave the good things of Egypt. And the people of Israel also began to complain. Oh, for some meat, they exclaimed. We remember the fish we used to eat for free in Egypt, and we had all the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic we wanted. But now our appetites are gone. All we ever see is this manna. So, interesting, because what we're seeing here is the Israelites are complaining, but they're not complaining and saying God isn't providing for them. They're complaining and saying, we don't like what God is providing for us. Because you see, if we were to continue into that chapter, there's these 2 paragraphs talking about the miraculous way that God is providing food called manna for them. It doesn't make any sense that such a large group of people is able to travel in the wilderness and have enough food for each one of them to be sustained. And yet God's providing for them literally through a daily miracle. And yet the Israelites are complaining because yes, God's providing, but they're like, I don't think we like what he's providing. But what's interesting is they're now saying what was good was the slavery that God has brought them out of. They're now looking back at Egypt and they're saying that's good. They miss that. But really, when they do that, they're missing the true goodness of what God has put into their life in the way that they are choosing to complain and look at it. But here's the thing, complaining is like a poison. Have you guys experienced that? Do you guys maybe like have a group of people that maybe come to mind that often complain? And when you're with them, you kind of feel like it's easy to jump in. Complaining can be like a poison in a group. Like once it starts, it kind of just wiggles its way in and everyone can start to complain and it distorts the truth. Maybe all of a sudden you're complaining about something you never would have even seen in a negative way before, but it just kind of wiggled its way in like a poison and now you're starting to have this negative light on it. I remember when I was in college, I used to work at the campus bookstore. And there was one time, like I worked there all the time and I worked with the same people all the time. And there was one time that we were like, hey, like we work together all the time. Let's try to hang out after work and like, you know, be more than just coworkers and be friends. So we go and we hang out after work and it was so awkward. Like I didn't really know them, they didn't really know me, and I remember leaving that and being like, that was weird. Like I'm with these people 30 hours a week, why couldn't we hang out? And I started to like really think about it, and I realized when we were at work, literally my work culture was just complaining. All people did, the coworkers, and because I was with it, like I would join in, like it would just be complaining about our job, complaining about our homework, complaining about our friends, complaining about the things going on in our lives. That was just what that culture was of that staff. And then when we left that, we literally didn't even know each other. Like we talked for 30 hours a week, but it wasn't anything that gave us like substance to know each other or build anything on. Complaining really doesn't create anything for you. And I was thinking about how like when I was in that environment, it was so easy for me to just be a part of it. And it made me think of this saying. I don't know if it'll connect with you like it does for me. But my parents have always said this saying. Growing up, they said, your body craves what you put in it. Meaning like if you're going to go around and eat candy and junk food, you're probably going to crave candy and junk food. But if you go around and you're like, I'm going to have some fruits and vegetables and other things, you'll actually start to crave those different foods that you're putting into you. You crave what you put in you. And I think that's similar, where if we're going to put ourselves in an environment of complaining and just being frustrated and unsatisfied with things, that's going to start to be a part of who we are. And we're going to start to see the world in that way. But if we put ourselves in an environment of people who are looking at the goodness of what God has put in our lives, who are talking about the blessings and the faithfulness of God, we're going to start to see that more naturally in our lives. And I think we see that with what happened here with the Israelites, because we see that it kind of started with these other people who weren't Israelites. And yet the Israelites, they just learned this lesson about complaining from God. But then as soon as other people around them started to complain, they fell right back into it. So these people they were around, they let it be just like a poison, and they picked it up and they ran with that heart of complaining. But here's the thing, our desires in life, the things that we want in life, they're all things that God has created us with. And there's never going to be a way where we can satisfy a God-given desire with something from the world. Think about that. We're never going to be able to satisfy a God-given desire with something from the world. I'll tell you what I mean by that. God created us with a desire to be loved. But if we're going to turn to the world and look for the feeling of being loved by different people around us and not from God, we're never going to be satisfied in that. Or he created us with a desire to have a purpose and a meaning in life. But if we look for that in the world, we're never going to be satisfied or find that. Or the desire to have worth and feel like we have value. But if we look for that in the world, it's never going to be satisfied. Or even this one, it's so simple. God gave us a desire to feel known, right? Isn't that so simple? Like, we just want to feel known and understood. But unless we're turning to God, the one who created us, the one who knows the number of hairs on our heads, the one who created the universe and yet knows your name, unless we turn to him to feel known, we will never truly feel known. Does that make sense? These desires God has given us will never be satisfied if we turn to the world to look for them. So here's the thing. We need to look for God's goodness in our life in order to be able to combat the temptation to complain. If our eyes are looking at the goodness of God and we're seeking to fill those desires in him, that's a way to actively combat our desire to complain, the temptation we have to complain when we look at the world for those things. So I have two questions for you guys to think about. You can talk about it in a small group, you can talk about it or think about it throughout the week. But how can you remember God's goodness? It kind of sounds like a big question, right? Like, oh, just remember God's goodness. But I actually want you to think about a practical thing you can do. Like, I know some people, they'll write down ways that they've seen God in their life and maybe write it on a Post-it note and put it on their mirror. Or maybe they journal. Or maybe you could just, if you have a phone, open up the Notes app and just start recording ways you've seen God's faithfulness in your life. There's a lot of creative ways of what can that look like for you to actively seek and remember God's goodness in our life. So that's kind of one side of the question. But then the other side of the question is, I think it's important for us to realize and name the cravings that we have in the world. Like, to think about, like, where am I looking at the world to fill these desires that I have? Where am I experiencing this temptation to complain and I'm not seeking God to make that satisfaction? So I want you to think about two sides of it. How can you look for God's goodness? But also, how can you identify areas in your life where you know that you're craving different things in the world? Because here's the thing. We can rest knowing that our greatest need, which is the need for a Savior, for salvation from our sin. Our greatest need has already been met by Jesus when he surrendered his life on the cross for us. That is a fact. That is true. If you have a relationship with God, your greatest need in life is met. And just for that one reason, we have nothing to complain about. That is an eternal need that God has given us an eternal answer for. That's a really big deal. That alone should give us satisfaction. But I want to kind of look back to this perspective I mentioned at the beginning, this idea of how like we have the ability to look at this like big picture of the Israelite story. And it's easy to look at it and be like, oh, of course you guys can have faith in God. Of course you guys don't need to complain. Like God is seeing you and he knows you. It's easy for us to have that perspective. But just know that if there was a book over here about your story and your life, the same God that you can say that about to the Israelite story is the same God that you can say that about to your story. That perspective we have of like hindsight is 2020, we see it so clearly how God is working in the Israelites' life. They didn't see it. They didn't see it as clearly. Yes, God still called them to have faith, but they didn't see what we see. It's the same way we can look at our life as well. We still have the ability to say it's the same God we serve. And so we know that we don't need to complain. We know that God has met our greatest need, and yet he still cares about our day-to-day needs. So just think about that as we go into our life, or as we go into our week, of this perspective of if we could just say it to ourselves the way we can say it about the Israelites, that of course we can trust God. Of course we don't need to complain. Of course we can take steps in faith. All right, let's pray. And then before you get up, I'm going to dismiss you by grade. So just stay in your seats. I know we can do it. All right. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for the opportunity to come together, to have some fun, to eat food, and just be in community, Lord. I just want to thank you and praise you for all of the new people you've brought into this space. I pray that we would continue to be able to be a community that is just inviting, and a community where we can continue to grow and learn more about you together. So Lord, I pray this all in your name. Amen.